Hi, everybody. My name is Beth Gilles. I am the director of the Lake Champlain, Lake George Regional Planning Board, also one of the founding members of the Upper Hudson River Watershed Alliance, or Coalition, I'm sorry. So as an organization, the Lake Champlain, Lake George Regional Planning Board, we serve Clinton, Essex, Hamilton, Warren, and Washington counties of New York State. We were created in 1967. To promote sustainable economic development, but we also do a lot of work, a lot of water quality work and work in watersheds. I have AICP certified planners on staff. We do a lot of grant writing as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But our focus issues are really water quality and watershed management planning, Main Street redevelopments, broadband and cell service, workforce housing, and we also work with small businesses. As part of our watershed management program, as I mentioned, we author watershed management plans, including the state's drinking water source protection program plans. We're a member of the various watershed coalitions that are within our region. We're also members of the water quality coordinating committees. We help a lot of lake associations with planning and education and outreach. We're also involved in the Ms4 program for municipalities, and we do a lot of procurement and management of grant funds. And there's just a list of some of our recent reports and watershed management plans that we've been working on, which you can find on our website. So the Upper Hudson River Watershed, it is the majority of our area, along with the Lake Champlain watershed. We do also have pieces of two other large watersheds, but not as much in terms of surface area. So there's a picture of the watershed within Essex, Hamilton, Warren, and Washington counties. And then it also includes areas within Fulton, Saratoga, and Rensselaer County. So it's Lake Tier in the Clouds in Essex County and the Adirondacks down to the federal dam at Troy is the Upper Hudson River watershed. And it includes large lakes like Scroon Lake, Great Sacandaga Lake, Ballston Lake, and then obviously the river as it comes down. So if you looked at this map before 2013, 2014, when we formed the Upper Hudson River Watershed Coalition, there was a big black hole where number 8 is. A lot of the entities, the County Soil and Water Conservation Districts and my office are a part of number 2, the Champlain Watershed Improvement Coalition of New York, or QWICNY. And that area was, or that group was formed in 2002 and has been really successful in garnering federal and state grants for water quality improvement projects. So we had been hemming and hawing for a long time about putting a watershed group together for the Upper Hudson River. It was easy in the Champlain watershed because the Lake Champlain has a TMDL for phosphorus. So that was kind of a way that everybody organized themselves around water quality projects, but we didn't have anything really like that in the Adirondack Park, or in the Upper Hudson River watershed. There are water bodies that are listed on the PWL, but most of them are for metals from atmospheric deposition. So, which is not really a world that we work in. So as I mentioned, we kind of hemmed and hawed until 2011, when we got 3 to 7 inches of rain in 4 hours, which caused a lot of catastrophic beaver dam failures within a couple of our counties, and really just took out a lot of the roads, and really created a lot of water quality issues with sediment movement. So we have erosion problems, we have things like that, we have sustainability issues and climate change issues, but we didn't have a group put together that would kind of move those things forward and try to work proactively to address them. So in 2013, 2014, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts from the 7 counties that make up the region, as well as my office, and the Greater Adirondack Resource Conservation and Development Council, put together the Upper Hudson River Watershed Coalition. And I put our mission statement, which is to provide a coordinated effort to improve water quality and other natural resources within the New York Upper Hudson River watershed counties through project planning and implementation. So the first thing that we did as a group was put together our priority issues and actions document. As I mentioned, we didn't have a TMDL to work off of. We didn't have really a regional plan to work off of. So we started really small. This is a 23-page document that I wrote, our office put together. It didn't cost any money. And so we put together 5 goals. Sorry, I'm playing with my screen. Put together 5 goals for the priority issues and actions document of what we wanted to achieve as a group. So we wanted to identify and develop sustainable funding sources for our work, create a watershed-wide plan, develop a list of projects, do education and outreach, and coordinate, cooperate, and communicate, which we were doing through the vehicle of the coalition. So as I mentioned, it's a really simple document. It's on our website if you're interested in looking at it. So the first thing we did was just kind of lay out the membership, and then we picked priority issues. And one of the benefits of having such a large group is everybody kind of has their own expertise. So we could cover a lot of water quality issues as a group and working together. So we chose stormwater, agriculture, erosion, water supply and wastewater, invasive species, and aquatic organism passage, and just listed out things that we wanted to look at within those resource issues as a group to improve water quality. So we have our 5 goals that I mentioned earlier. We put in some objectives of how we would reach those goals. Again, just kind of simple, starting out at the ground level to build up some momentum as a group to work together moving forward. So of the 6 priorities that we had, I asked each county to pick the 3 that were most important to them. Again, our region is so different, and I'll show a map later in the presentation that shows that as well. So these are just what everybody picked based on the work that they did. And when I say everybody, I mean the soil and water conservation districts, based on the work that they were doing at the time. And then I asked them all to provide me with information on 3 to 5 projects that they already had in the hopper. When you go to apply for any kind of grant funding, they want to see that you have worked together and thought about it and written it down. And so that's really what we were trying to do here, was just get some things that were already in our minds that needed to be done, but we still needed to secure funding for, and put them in here so that we could then leverage this document to move us forward. And we did. We were very successful in it. So we took this issues and actions document and applied for a DEC WQIP grant in 2015. It was $482,000 for our hydroseeders, roadside erosion projects, and we also did a roadside erosion assessment. We also, the same year, used that issues and actions document to apply for a Department of State LWRP grant, which is a $255,000 grant to do a watershed management plan. We also used that document in 2014, along with some others, to secure an NRCS Resource Conservation Partnership Program grant. It was the first year those were out. We secured $1 million for ag environmental planning. I will note that was over 11 counties. We worked with 4 watershed groups to get that funding. But again, because we formed as a coalition and we had this issues and actions document together, we were kind of on the same par as Champlain and Black River, which also had DOS funded plans already. And then in 2018, we secured an additional DEC WQIP for roadside erosion work, which we're currently still going with right now. We're in the last year of that. So I mentioned the very first WQIP. We focused on roadside erosion because that was something that everybody was kind of already working on. And we had some counties that didn't have hydroseeders. And that was really how Essex County and Warren County had been successful in working with municipalities and working on roadside erosion projects. So we ended up purchasing hydroseeders for those 3 counties. And we also did various roadside erosion projects and the roadside assessment inventory. So the roadside erosion assessment, this is something we had already done in the Lake Champlain watershed. So we just kind of copied what we had done there. We purchased tablets that were GPS enabled, and we created a fillable form. And the soil and water conservation districts went out and drove their counties and drove the roads and identified and ranked roadside erosion sites as high, medium, and low priority for remediation. So we used 5 criteria: direct connection to a water body, percent vegetation, level of erodibility, bank slope, and site area to get that high, medium, and low designation that we used. And at the end of the effort, which took about 2 summers, we identified 787 sites totaling 1.93 million in funding needs. And again, this report's on our website, which is lclgrpb.org. And I think I put it at the end too. So this is just kind of how we determined the rankings for all of these. Direct connection and proximity to a stream. Yes, you got 10 points. No, you didn't get any. Percent vegetation based on how much was there is how the points and the way the scoring works is the higher the score, the higher priority for remediation. Level of erodibility looked at whether it was actively slumping or not. Bank slope, again, a greater slope, greater possibility of erosion, and width and length, so the area they calculated in the end. And the fillable PDF form that we put together were drop downs because we wanted to take out as much subjectivity in the data collection as we could. So everyone was given a drop down, a yes or a no, or various ranges that they all picked. You could take pictures with the tablet and geo-reference that form and the picture to the latitude and longitude of the site. So we had all of the information and we can make a map out of it. So if a site got a 0 to 30, it was low, 31 to 39, moderate, 40 to 60 was high priority. And those are just some definitions kind of the general look of a site, whether it was high, moderate, and low. If it was high, it had bare soils, steep banks, highly erodible material. It was either directly connected to or close to a water body. Moderate was in the middle, moderate slope, moderately erodible, medium square footage. It could probably be remediated with vegetation, whereas the high priority sites might need some kind of structural maintenance done. And then low was just mostly vegetated, but it could probably be hit with a hydroseeder to help it stabilize out a little bit more. And so we put together a book, which we provided to all of the highway departments. Again, all of the planning that we have been doing is meant to direct what the coalition does as well, but it's also meant to help municipalities prioritize their areas. So with the small budgets they have with the DPWs, we can go to them and say, hey, these are the sites that you have that maybe you want to look at. The counties could go help hydroseed as well, or some of the higher priority sites need help, but we also put management instructions in there too. So it's just kind of like, these are the things that we think you could and should do there. So we've had some municipalities go off on their own and just do them all. Some have asked us for assistance, which we've done through the WQIPs. But as I mentioned, we had 787 sites. This is how we just kind of listed them out in the book. Red is high, yellow is medium, green's low, and they're all just referenced out there. And these are some of the pictures. Again, we did this specifically because we didn't have a lot of water bodies listed on the PWL for silt and sediment. And so we wanted to show that we did have erosion problems and erosion movement into water bodies, that we needed grant funding basically to help remediate, even though it wasn't these water bodies that they were near, the watersheds they were in weren't specifically listed as being impaired or impacted in any way by silt and sediment. It was basically a way for us to prove that there were other things going on in the watershed other than atmospheric deposition. And this is just a map of where the erosion sites are located within the watershed. And we included this in our watershed management plan for DOS as well. So we took that erosion book and we leveraged it into a 2018 WQIP for $389,000. We are addressing 92 high and medium priority sites within the watershed straight out of that book. They will total to 33.5 acres of remediation, and various things in each site is different and each town is different. And so the soil and water conservation districts are working with the town to get those remediated either through hydroseeding, check dams, sediment basins. Some of them are larger projects which require regrading slopes. We try to use woody vegetation as much as possible. And so because we're wrapping that grant up right now, we also applied for another one this past summer in the state CFA rounds through Hamilton County Soil and Water for 48 more sites for $285,000. And I should mention too, The Regional Planning Board is not an eligible entity for WQIP grants, but towns and soil and water conservation districts are. So the way that we have worked our grants is we kind of rotate around the counties, and they are the applicant and the sponsor for the grant, but the work gets done throughout the region, and that's worked out really well. And every time we get a grant, we just kind of move to another one. Our office actually manages the grant, so we do all the quarterly reporting and the paperwork and all the accounting with the clerks from the soil and water conservation districts. And so it really has worked really well. So we also got funding for a DOS LWRP. And this is, we wanted to take our priority issues and actions document and really leverage it into a large watershed plan and just kind of get to the down to the, dive deeper into the data and the information for the watershed and display that out in a plan. So it was a $255,000 grant. We focused it around our 6 priorities that we had identified in our priority issues and actions document. So stormwater, ag, erosion, water supply, wastewater, invasive species, and aquatic organism passage. And we did the usual, the watershed characterization. We did a municipal code review. Our priority issues and water quality concern, again, we chaptered out based on those 6 priorities. And then we ended up with recommendations and implementation. And we have 190 projects totaling $300 million in funding needs, everything ranging from fencing on ag lands to, rebuilding wastewater treatment plants and everything in between. So the vision for our plan, and we put together an advisory committee, as you do with these Department of State efforts. So we had members of all the soil and water conservation districts, my office. The town of Horicon was the sponsor for the grant, so they were on it as well. But we also had state and federal entities, DOS, DEC, we had Farm Bureau, and we had the Washington County Sewer District executive director was on it as well. So we wanted to make sure that we had people from each one of those worlds of that priority issue so that they could really help us steer the vision in the chapter and what they really wanted to see come out of this, and also how it could be useful to them. And that's something that you want to do at the very beginning and engage with, as I mentioned, these plans aren't just for my office. They're not just for the districts. They're for everybody. They're for the towns. They're for the nonprofits. They're for, Cornell Cooperative Extension we had on there. They're meant to be guiding documents for everybody to kind of work together in the same vein. So our vision is the Upper Hudson River Watershed is an incredible place to live, work, play, and visit, with clean and healthy natural and water resources that are abundant and support diverse ecological, economic, and recreation opportunities. Watershed communities are resilient and thriving with active seasonal and year-round residents who support healthy agriculture and forestry product industries that are sustainable and employ practices to protect water quality. Some fun facts about the watershed. It's about 4,000 square miles in New York State. The Upper Hudson River is approximately 162 miles long. There's 7 counties with 92 municipalities. About 7,100 miles of freshwater rivers, 229 significant lakes, ponds, and reservoirs. There are 24 hectares of watersheds. That's what we used. And you'll see in some maps in a minute. That's what we used to drill down into some of the areas. We have 50 water bodies listed on the PWL, but I mentioned most of those are for atmospheric deposition and also PCBs from contaminated soil, which is really what the Upper Hudson is listed for in our region. And our predominant land use is wild, forested, and conservation land. So you can see I put the land use map in here. So all of the dark green is state land. And part of the Adirondack Park, that blue line that you see going around is the Adirondack Park. And then you get down into the southern parts of the watershed, you get into really heavy ag districts and also a lot of residential development. In our municipal code review, we found that 75 have comp plans, 79 have zoning regulations, 80 have subdivision and 68 have site plan, but we found that only 37 have stormwater and erosion control regulations. So that was really interesting when you talk about things that you want to work on for the future, is maybe doing a little bit more education for municipalities and stormwater erosion control regulations and how those can help improve water quality. And these are some maps that I pulled out, the ones I think are interesting. Erosion potential, you can see, is down in the ag lands. MS4s, we focused a lot of the stormwater discussion on MS4 communities because that's where the development is, and these separate stormwater sewer systems, but it also we had information on combined sewer systems as well. In our ag districts, ag is a huge part of our watershed, and we're very proud of that. And it's a great community and a great resource. So we wanted to make sure that we really celebrated the ag community, but also mentioned some things that could improve water quality throughout their work. Invasive species was another one of our chapters. So we have a map, and we had a large discussion on aquatic and terrestrial invasive species. So this is a map showing the occurrences in the watershed. Also water wells, we did water withdrawals. As I mentioned, combined sewer systems, because wastewater was a part of that chapter as well. And water treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants, sorry. And then when it came to the projects, we wanted to find a way to show how different parts of the watershed are concerned about different things. So we took the HUC 10 subwatersheds and just indicated where projects in each one of the priority issues were within. So the one on my left, the ag, you'll see all the ag projects are down in the Washington County and the Saratoga County area. There's not a ton of ag within the Adirondack Park. The next map is the stormwater projects, which are kind of all over, and they're different in size and in intensity and what needs to be done depending on where you are in the watershed. The invasive species projects, a lot in Hamilton County. Hamilton County Soil and Water does a lot of work with invasive species, and also down even in the ag districts as well. The erosion projects are within Essex County and a little bit down in the southern part of the watershed. The aquatic organism passage projects are kind of scattered around the watershed, around some of the larger lakes and maybe the more developed areas that have a lot of road crossings. And the water and wastewater projects, again, are within areas that have water and wastewater systems, which are more down into the southern part of the watershed. And so we spent a significant amount of time talking to mayors and town supervisors and highway superintendents and water superintendents and nonprofits and county agencies and local agencies to get the projects. And because again, it's not just meant for us, it's meant for everybody to use. And when you are looking for grant funding to get your projects implemented, the question you're going to have to answer, one of the first questions, is what plan is your project listed in? Because the granting agencies want to see that you got together, you thought about it, and you wrote it down and you put it in a plan that you published out and said, these are our concerns and this is what we want to do about it. So we have our 6 sections based on our watershed, or based on our priority issues. And we have pages and pages and pages of projects. We don't expect to be involved in all of them. We're certainly not going to implement all of them ourselves, but again, it's meant for everybody to be able to utilize. And so 2021, we released this plan in March of 2020, and it turned out everybody had some other stuff to worry about. So there were no state grants in 2020, but coming out in 2021, when the state grants reopened, I mentioned we applied for another DEC WQIP, 48 sites. We also applied for DOS LWRP for 7 culverts, we had actually applied for those same culverts through the DECW QIP a few years prior and weren't awarded. So we decided we'd try to do it through the LWRP program as implementation of our plan, since we had it finalized and published. So that's another thing when you're looking at grants and you're looking for ways to pay for things. If it doesn't work out in one with one state agency or one granting program, look for other ones. There's more than one, and so make sure you diversify yourself if you're looking to get your projects funded. And so the next step that we're taking is to turn our watershed plan into a 9-element plan. So if you're familiar with a 9-element plan, there are EPA plans. The DOS and the DEC have been working very diligently to get 9-element plans across the state. So we took our DOS LWRP and gave it to DEC staff, and they actually have a checklist, and they'll go through your plan, and it says all the things in it that need to be in it for it to be an accepted 9-element plan. And they'll check off all the things you have, and they'll let you know all the things you don't. So where we fell short was monitoring and modeling, which we knew that going in. It was not something we had originally written into the DOS plan. You may be able to do that now. That's a Kate Hogle question, not a me question. But we actually wrote in LWRP specifically this summer to do monitoring and modeling so that we can turn the plan that we have now into a 9-element plan. And what that does for you is just opens up additional federal pots of funding that you wouldn't normally be eligible for if you weren't in a TMDL watershed or you didn't have a 9-element plan, which we don't have either of those in Upper Hudson. And so that's it for my presentation. If anybody's wondering what the Hudson River looks like at its origin, that's it. Up in Lake Terror of the Clouds, coming out of Lake Terror of the Clouds up on Mount Mercy.
Great, thank you so much, Beth. It's so helpful to hear how you've walked through these different planning processes, starting with the priority issues document, and the roadside assessment, and the LWRP watershed plan, just sort of building and providing examples of these different scales, which we've also been talking about over the course of the conference. So we've got some questions that are coming in. One of the questions is in looking at the Upper Hudson Watershed Coalition as an entity, but also this watershed planning process, how are elected leaders represented and how are decisions made? And, for both the council and then also in the planning process.
So for the coalition, we actually, and I skipped over this part, but we did become a 501c3. Only the soil and water districts and my office are part of that. So as the actual coalition, but we work with our municipalities all of the time, and that's how we get all of this stuff done. So by using these plans that we've made, so I say this all the time, but I never show up to municipality and tell them that they have a problem without telling them how to fix it and how I'm going to pay for it. So that's what we use these plans for. We say, listen, we did this work. The roadside erosion one is a really good example. We just schedule meetings and one-on-one, and that's what we did too with the DOS plan as well, was we spent a lot of time scheduling one-on-one meetings. Just give me an hour of your time and tell me everything that's wrong in your town, and I'll write it down, and everything you need money for, and I'll see if it fits into the effort that we're putting it in. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't, and that's okay. There's other efforts that it could be a part of as well. But engaging the elected officials is very important to the work that we do and getting that work implemented as well. We don't know everything that's going on everywhere in the watershed, so we look out for the people who do.
And you made an important point too, that the regional planning board can't apply for those WQIP funds, right? So you rely on municipalities, counties, or local in that stage as well. For the erosion, roadside erosion assessment document, does your planning include an assessment of erosive stormwater discharge that might be mitigated before or in addition to bank stabilization? So looking sort of up watershed.
Yeah, not in the the document itself, well, I guess when we put the mitigation efforts in there, and we do just kind of very simple, hydroseed, structural catch basin, or sediment basin, something like that. But yeah, it involves the staff that are doing it, especially the ones that we want to go implement. They'll walk upstream and seeing what's causing it, and then see if there's something that we need to do about it up there versus, just continuously hydroseeding something that's going to continue to erode. So it does, but that's not necessarily in the document itself. That's when we get into kind of the implementation of the projects.
Okay, great, thank you. How would you deal with one-on-one engagement and meetings and stakeholder engagement during COVID?
It was very difficult during COVID, and more so just because everybody's attention was elsewhere, and us as well. We're definitely using some of these watershed plans as a way to re-engage and kind of be like, hey, remember the work that we're doing here? But even a Zoom is better than nothing. And I've actually found it, it's not as much fun, I guess, as being in person with people. But even just an hour-long Zoom to say, hey, this is what we're working on. Do you have anything that you want to put towards the effort? They're not going to read a 350-page watershed management plan. But if you can just bullet out for them the important things that are for their town, you can do it over a Zoom.
Great, thank you. I know some of the folks on the Zoom are currently working on watershed planning and grappling with some of that engagement strategies. So that's helpful background. For the communities in the watershed that are MS4s, is being an MS4 community, does that count as having stormwater control regulations, or are those local regulations above and beyond what the state MS4 requirements are?
So the MS4s are just, are you talking about the stormwater regulations that we had in the plan?
Yep.
That's a good question, and I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and read it. But we do have municipalities that have stormwater regulations above and beyond, that have them that are not MS4 communities, but there's not a lot of them. So one of the things we've been kicking around the office for a long time and haven't really gotten around to making it happen is like an Ms4 Lite program, which takes the really good pieces of the Ms4 program. If you're familiar with it, the public education, the illicit discharge, the construction, stormwater management work, and just kind of helps municipalities understand and develop some of those kind of programs without being under the tough regulations of being an MS4 program with the annual reporting and the kind of stuff that you have to do with the DEC. But to answer your original question, I don't know. I'd have to look.
But it looks like Larry is clarifying that he meant the survey or regulations, the assessment of the local policy mentioned that there were only 27 municipalities had stormwater rules.
Yeah, the stormwater and erosion control regulations. And I'm not sure if those include the MS4s and maybe a couple more above them, or a couple more above that number of MS4s.
Okay, thank you. For any of these plans, were you looking at particular size storm events in terms of design or future projections? We heard a lot yesterday about flooding and erosion. In these plans, were you considering certain size storms?
Yeah, are you talking about the roadside erosion assessments, I'm assuming? Yeah, so whenever you apply for a grant, especially through the DECW QIP program, there are certain things you have to do, especially steeple, which is the EPA spreadsheet that you use to estimate your load reductions. And so we always do those with that. So yeah, that's where that comes in, is the work that we're going to do to stabilize, the size of the watershed and the types of storms and the average type of storm within the region, then helps you calculate out your load reductions.
Okay, yeah, and I got a clarification that this is particularly for the culvert assessments.
Oh, for the culverts. Yeah, 100-year. Everything is 100-year store.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think we've actually gotten through all the questions and we are actually running ahead of schedule. And so I think we should go ahead and take our 10-minute break now and not delay that. And we'll have a couple more minutes for some of the other presenters later on today, if that's all right with you, Beth.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Beth Gilles, for giving this talk. Again, lots of really, I think, manageable scale projects showing the progression of different types of plans, going from this priority issues document, which is sort of like a, at the group level, what do we want to accomplish? Looking at this roadside erosion assessment, which is a specific watershed analysis, and then going from the DOS LWRP watershed plan into a 9-element plan. They're doing it all on the Upper Hudson. So great to hear about your work, and hopefully you're all inspired to think about how this might apply to your own watershed work as well.